This is a media clip final. For this class, we were supposed to talk about all the different characteristics of the disabilities and to talk about the needs of each one of them and the needs of all students. The first ones were learning disabilities. I went through each learning disability or different things in all of our chapters and talked about each one of them. So this might be a little longer than expected, but that's just how I organized this thing. Instead of just doing them all together, I organized it in different things. So the first one was learning disabilities. There's several different ways for social, cognitive, intellectual, and academic. The academic people struggle more 20% into reading or writing versus just both of them, but there are some that struggle in both areas of this. For the intellectual ones, they might be grade level behind their classmates or other disability students in their classroom, but usually the learning disabilities are a grade level or a little more behind the class. For the cognitive, this could be anywhere from autism, ADD, any of those that will have difficulty in reading and writing and those kinds of things. For the social, they will have more depression than anyone else or have anxiety. They'll feel like they're alone and don't feel like they belong to a certain group. For the UDL, this one is important. Because you want to, or if students have learning disabilities, you want them to be able to organize and have a graphic organized of each thing for each subject maybe. So you would say, hey, pull out this graphic organizer for this subject, this subject, this subject, and this subject, just because then they feel like they are can learn better because they're being more organized. They do lack more organization, so you do want to help them be more organized in their everyday lives. So that's how you can help them do that. With anyone else you're wanting to do, you'll just find ways to help them to and not just learning disability. So maybe like have autism or that stuff, and you're trying to figure out what there are. So you're gonna have to try to figure out like different kind of projects. Maybe organization will work for one, but not for one person, because they don't learn very good at organization. They're more for like ADHD. We're not an organized person. We're kind of more messy. So we might learn better in a pigsty versus a more organized person, like a gifted student or someone who is succeeding into those. But you do want to work with everyone into different kind of categories. So like graphic organizers, you want them to all try it just to see what works for them and what doesn't work for them, because maybe one works good for the other one and one doesn't. So you gotta just figure out and just play around with all your students to see which one works best for each student. Communication is a big one for people because we communicate every day and nonstop if you're teaching. So for the social, they might not understand what you're trying to talk about, and they will have lower grades if they don't understand what you're saying because they cannot hear you, or you're not talking sign language to them. So you need to figure out if like maybe someone's blind but they can hear really good and you're doing just sign language. So you got to figure out what works for them, and maybe have like put different groups and separate them and have like one person do just for those kids who do sign languages versus the people who can't hear but they can see, vice versa. If they can't hear, they can see. So you want to do the brittle things, all that stuff. So you do want to work for each student. A good UDL is let them do their own work in many different ways. Like if you want to do PowerPoints or do video talking about a thing and not just listening to you talk. Have them make a PowerPoint while you're talking so they can do things that learns best for them. Behavior disorders, it can go both ways. This might not affect some of your schools. It might affect some of your schools. It depends on what your behavior problem is. Like if someone has a fear of heights, that's not going to affect someone versus who has a fear of going to school every day. The person who has a fear of going to school every day versus the one who has a fear, that person with school might have more of a problem with school and to have trouble into school. So you need to figure out how you can work with them to figure out what works for them and how they can learn with that. Also, behavior disorders, most of them, I read that I think 52% drop out of school because of behavior problems. So as a teacher of us, we need to figure out how we can stop them dropping out of school. We want them to make sure that school is important, so you want to make sure that they want to come to school, even though their behaviors might be a problem here and there. But you got to figure out, hey, I cannot let their behaviors get in the way of letting them learn, because if I don't let them learn and think, hey, I'm going to kick them out because of their behaviors, they're more likely to drop out and they won't have a good education, so they won't be able to have jobs in the future, and more likely they'll get in trouble more. So even if they have trouble, you need to figure out how to work together and to get them through the school, and for them to make sure that they come to school every day to learn, even though they might have behavior problems. A good UDL is technology. So I was reading the textbook about this one, and it said that technology is a big one. So if they are having a disability, or not a disability, sorry, a behavior, then they click this button on the iPad. I don't know what it does, but it just helps them be able to control their behavior in a classroom setting versus like hitting someone or going off on the teacher or just walking out of classrooms. So these technologies really help them. So once they feel like they're getting angry or going to lash out on something, they'll push this button and they will do better. For ADHD, this one hit me really hard because I do have ADHD. If you haven't read any of my things so far, but I struggled. I got diagnosed in 2nd grade. I started taking medicine for that in 2nd grade also. But I did have trouble learning. I was not like everyone else. Yes, there was a group of people who might have ADD, ADHD, or gifted. They might go out, but I was the only one who had ADHD in my classroom. So I had to learn different ways and how to think like, hey, this might work good for this student, but it's not going to work good for me, because like for some, they can read this chapter nonstop and then get that and then take a test and ace it. For me, I could read that just the first page and forget everything that I just read about. So for me, I had to write down things, or I had a parent come to me in my classrooms and take me out and reading, or any of the language arts. Those were the 2 classes that I struggled the most in, but they also came to all my other classes. But for those classrooms, they really took me out, and I went to a different room to do those subjects because that's where I struggled in, and I was couple grades below everyone else for my reading and that stuff, so my comprehension wasn't as high. So as my IEP came, we were discussing on what ways I could do better. So those, but the those students do tend to have more behaviors or anxiety or be social or emotional versus the other students. So you got to figure out, if they have ADHD, you want them to make sure they feel at home and not feel like they don't belong here. Because for me, like, I was really embarrassed to go out of classrooms to learn. And I was like, no, I'm not going to go out of classrooms to learn. I'm just going to stay here. I don't care if I struggled, I don't care if I fail, but I want to be like everyone else. So you got to feel like, or work with them to make sure that they don't feel like they can just fail or drop out, because that's not the answer. You want them to succeed, so you're going to have to work with them. Maybe if they don't want to go, leave the classroom, stay after class with them every day and to just work with them. There's different ways to go about it. But teaching them to be more organized does help, but they usually are not organized, so it does take time to get them more organized with everything and to have goal setting. So even though those two are important, they do have trouble with that. And for instance, medication is usually used in this thing because some cannot behave without medicine. I had medicine my whole life, like I said, so I had to go to the doctor all the time just to get adjusted. And the teacher, it's very important for the teacher to examine if they know this person's having ADHD and started a new medicine. It's very important for them to be paying attention, to take notes when there's a behavior problem or anything. Because when I got diagnosed and I had to go through all these different medicines to see which one worked, they really based their opinions off of the teachers and my mom to see what medicine worked for me and if I should go up in the dose or lower in dose. For the intellectual disabilities, they interact with each other, and they're 1.9 times more likely that their parents didn't get an education above high school. So for intellectual, it's very important for them to go past high school or go on to high school or college, whatever that might be. So you want to push them into their schooling. You need to figure out and make them want to come back to school and not feel like they can't come back to school. This really involves the e-readers to help them succeed into classrooms. So even though you might have 15 different students that all learn different, you need to figure out what works for them. So maybe this one person, they get an e-reader, this person gets an e-text, or this person will learn by a graphic organizer. This person just talks to you about it. So you just need to let them all do what they need to do to learn this thing. Autism, it can play both roles into school. Sometimes they are very gifted and sometimes they are not very gifted. Usually the gifted are the Asperger's, I think it is, that are very gifted, but they don't have the social skills that everyone else does. So they are more like, if you are going to class, for instance, they would like to go under the table just to do their homework, and they don't really, in a playground, they're going to be by themselves. They don't want to play with other people. For this classroom, this is going to be also hard because they're not going to want to talk or be in groups because they're not a people person. They want to do everything themselves. So let them be able to learn by themselves or learn the way they do. So, for instance, if you're teaching a lesson, even though it could be distracting to some, let them be able to go under the desk or sit on the ground or do whatever, or bounce on a bouncing seat, just to see how they learn and what can work for them. Multiple disabilities, the schooling can range throughout. Some are gifted, some are not. Some are social, some are not, like I said. But these are more adaptive and don't have a motor or sensory skills as most people do. Their thing is they're going to need technology to get them through everyday lives and for schooling. So you need to be able to incorporate technologies in your classroom so they can be using technology to get a better things. some of the multiple disabilities is like mentally challenged with trying to find it, sorry. With blindness or something like that. So they're also mentally challenged, but they're also blind. So you got to figure out ways to get them to learn being a mentally challenged student, but also blind, being blind, because blind people can't see. So you got to have to use those brailles. So usually technology is a good thing for them because they can maybe hear really good, so they're going to need earphones, and maybe that's how they learn being a mentally challenged student. They also might not be as social as everyone else, so you got to make sure that you don't push them out of their things, because they can lash out being angry at you or in general, because they are just stuck to themselves and they don't want to be around people or to talk about people. The next one is brain injury. If it's a severe brain injury, this is going to be more hard to pay attention to classrooms. This can have effect into having them have seizures in their everyday lives. They might not process information as fast as other people because they've had so many head injuries. But the ones that aren't as severe, they probably won't see a lot of damage or a lot of trouble in school versus the people who've had major brain injuries and who have a major effect in schools. So those people who do that, you need to find it. You need to find a way to get them learning. Some get on medications just to help them focus or their brain activity to work better than normal. But make sure, if they can't pay attention for more than 30 minutes at a time, let them go out and take breaks or something, just to get their anger out or whatever it might be. Let them take breaks throughout the time, because if you just let them sit down in a 45-minute period and they only take 15 minutes versus if they go out for a minute, each 15 minutes to 20 minutes, they're going to learn more taking that break and to actually learn. Hearing loss is a big one, and it's difficult for teachers to do it because not everyone knows how to do sign language or that. But if they cannot hear, they cannot hear, and this will make going to school or their academic a lot harder, because as a teacher, we communicate every day by language, and they might not be able to do that, and teachers might not be able to do sign language every day. So we got to figure out, if they are in sign language, we need to figure out someone who can do sign language just to get them where they need to be in their school. And also, they might have more social problems because, for instance, they can't bond with anyone because some of their friends, their friends don't know how to do sign language. Some might, but some probably won't. So they can't bond with those kids, and anyone else who can just talk, that we can bond with each other because we don't have to do these sign languages, is just to communicate with people. A good way to do that is communicate in sign language. Even though it might be hard for you, you need to learn that and take the extra steps to providing them the best in their school. Blindness, I kind of talked about this a little bit, but technology is a good one for this because of those brailles, so they can feel or they can hear. Usually if they can't see, they can hear really good. If they can't hear, they can see really good. We just have to play along with that. They do have trouble understanding some of the ideas because they never experienced it. So you got to figure out how you can make them experience these things if they could actually see. So maybe have everyone shut their eyes and just talk about what they are seeing or what they are feeling right now, just so you can collaborate with that person versus the whole class too. So you don't have to just stick that one person out because they're blind. Have everyone close their eyes and to just talk about something, just so we can get everyone on the same page. It also limits their performance because since we do talk every day and our language is a big one, they might not understand what we're saying or understanding something, and we don't know how to communicate with them to change or to make them understand. So performance is a big one for them too. Being gifted, this is a whole different category. This is not really a disability, but the gifted people, they do go out of class too, just like the other people, so it is kind of like that. But you got to figure out to not make school so boring, because if they know what they're doing and they're just sitting down because they finished that in 5 minutes, but it usually takes a class 45 minutes to do that assignment, you got to figure out to make that project more tough for them, or to let them do it their way, and to challenge them in everyday life or in their subjects that they are exceeding in, to make them struggle, or not really struggle, but to be not bored in class. Because being bored in class, usually they're like, well, why am I coming to school? Because I'm so smart. So you got to work with them too and figure out what you can do to make them want to come to school every day and to learn more. They usually do have less depression, anxiety. Sometimes they might not talk to people because they just have that. People might like say, hey, you are gifted, and might label them that. So it is very important for everyone just to get along, no matter what disability they have. And it's important as a teacher just to talk about all these different disabilities and how we're all the same person, but we just might learn different. And as a teacher, that is your job, to make sure everyone feels welcomed into their classrooms and want to learn. And you got to help everyone learn in different ways. And you can't just stick to one way of teaching your whole time. You're going to have to always learn different ways to teach, just to provide them the best performance that you can give them, so they can perform and get a higher education and get higher jobs. That is what I have for this thing. Bye.